Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Nature Connections webinar series from the Campbell Valley Nature House. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jeff Roten and I'm with Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. So this webinar series is graciously hosted by Pacific Parklands Foundation, and I'd like to introduce their Executive Director, Janet Antonio, to say a few words.
Thank you, Jeff. Hello, everyone. It's too bad that we can't be outside as much as we want today, but it is nice that you're all joining us. And I would like to start by acknowledging that the Campbell Valley Nature House is on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish First Nations. And I wish to extend my appreciation and all of our appreciation for the opportunity to hold this webinar on their shared traditional territories. Thank you. The Pacific Parkland Foundation, it's our pleasure to host these webinars. We were founded 20 years ago with the intention of supporting Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. So we raise funds, donations, and then we give grants back to park associations and other stakeholders and to support Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. And the goal is to protect our parks and connect people with nature, which is why we're here today. So thank you to Jeff for his passion and excitement for setting this up. He's always amazing with the topics and speakers that he comes forward with. Thank you for Zoey for coming out tonight. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. And thank you to the Campbell Valley Nature House for partnering with us. It's a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to all of your questions and chats. Thanks for now.
Great, thanks, Janet. So for those of you who haven't been there, the Nature House is in Campbell Valley Regional Park. It's in South Langley in Metro Vancouver. It's currently housed in a beautiful heritage barn, and that's the barn on the bottom of the slide there, and has interactive exhibits and displays for the whole family. Anyway, tonight I'm very excited to welcome my co-worker, Zoey Slater, to talk about bear awareness. So welcome, Zoey.
Hello, everybody. Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight for our Bear IQ webinar. My goal for this evening is to share some interesting and cool facts about bears, and hopefully for people to walk away with a better appreciation for these creatures and how amazing and magnificent they are. And also ways that we can all coexist, as more and more of us have had new interactions with bears. So hoping that we can all live together and be happy. So a little bit about me is I have a degree in biology. I used to work in the Fraser Valley a lot with species at risk. I've worked for Metro Vancouver Regional Parks for about 7 years now. And previous to that, I worked for Bearware. And so that's probably one of the reasons why this topic is really important to me. And I have a passion for it to share my knowledge and talk to people about this, about how we can coexist with these animals through that experience that I had. So the animal that we're here to talk to today is the black bears. So the Latin name is Ursus americanus. So we have two bear species in British Columbia. So we have black bears and we have grizzly bears. So black bears are pretty much throughout the whole province, very widespread, and approximately the population's around 120 to 150,000 bears within the province. Grizzly bears, we don't have the same high numbers of them, and they're not all throughout the province. So grizzly bears are about 15,000 bears throughout the province. And of course, we don't have grizzly bears on Vancouver Island. We don't have them in the lower mainland or the central interior. So we just have black bears. All right. So we're going to do a little quizzes throughout my presentation, just kind of like the one that Jeff already did. So here's the first one. And what I just really want to know is more about get an understanding of people's experiences with bears and where you've seen them before. So Jeff, if you want to do that first poll.
And there you go, Zoey.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so it seems like a lot of people have seen bears in a lot of places. There's actually like a lot of you in your neighborhoods, in your backyards. Obviously, we've all seen them on the TV or internet. So I can say that I've seen bears in all of those circumstances. I have had bears in my backyard, in my neighborhood. I've seen them in my parks when I'm out there. So if we have time at the end too, I can share some of my bear stories. So that's great. I'm glad that people are seeing bears, and hopefully we can just talk about at the end, you know, how we coexist with these animals in this shared space that we have. All right, so black bears is who we're here to talk about, but the name black bears is actually a bit deceiving because yes, this bear in the picture and my friend back here has black fur, but black bears come in a lot of different color variations, and so they're not always this typical black. However, this is probably how we recognize them, or what most likely we see. You might have bears that we call cinnamon. So they have this browner texture, this more cinnamon color. So the challenges with this sometimes, if you're in areas where there's both black bears and grizzlies, sometimes these black bears can get confused with grizzlies because grizzlies are much browner and more blonde and lighter color. So sometimes there's confusion between that. You could also have a black bear that's white, believe it or not. So this is a Kermode bear, or probably some of you have heard the term spirit bear. So it's not albino, it hasn't lost its pigment. So Kermode bears are a subspecies of the black bear. And basically what's happened is the population has been isolated to the Great Bear Rainforest, which is along the coast of BC, which you can see the map on the corner there. And with this isolation, the recessive gene that these bears have has been able to present itself in either white or cream colored fur. So black bears can be white as well. And to show kind of how rare this occurrence is for the white coloration, so you could have a black bear that has a white cub, or you could have a spirit bear that has black bear cubs. Because it's recessive gene, it's not always presented, and it doesn't always show. So black bears come in all different colors, so they're not just black. So next, let's talk about size, because that's another interesting thing and very varied for bears. So bears can be anywhere from around 175 pounds to 650 pounds. So this will be dependent on obviously the age of the bear or the sex of the bear. If it's female or male, males are going to be larger. So the one bear that you see on the one side there is what we call a yearling. So this bear is probably just a couple years old, and it's what we call sometimes our teenager bears. So very curious fellows, and potentially getting into trouble if they've just been released from their mom. But smaller bears haven't really got the weight on necessarily yet. But a larger bear, like this mature adult bear that you see, it can get very big, and these bears get very big. And depending on the time of year, whether they're getting ready for to go to den in the winter or something like that, bears could potentially get bigger because they need to put on weight for the winter. So another variation in black bears. So one of the things I always say between grizzlies and black bears is color and size can be misleading. So as I've shown, bears can be all different sizes. You could have a small grizzly bear, or you could have a larger black bear with different coloration. So there is obviously other things that you can do to determine between the two of them. So one thing that I wanted to show you was you can see on these images here the claws. So I'm going to hold these up and hopefully you can see. So this claw here is a grizzly bear claw. And if I wrap my finger around it, you can see it's actually bigger than my finger. So that's how long the claw is. And then the black bear claw is obviously quite a bit smaller. So this means that these two bears are good at different things. So with this big grizzly bear claw, they are excellent diggers. So they will be able to dig and get in to create a den and things like that. They also potentially will be digging for small mammals and things like that in order to get them. Whereas, and they're not very good tree climbers, whereas the black bear with these smaller claws are better tree climbers. So this enables them to climb trees better. Not to say that a grizzly couldn't potentially climb a tree, but black bears are much better at it. Also, you'll notice in the pictures, you'll see the front tracks where the grizzlies is more sort of flat and forward, whereas the black bears is a little bit more curved. And so this actually also helps them enable for climbing and makes them better climbers. Black bears also will use these claws in order to dig up logs and things like that, because a big source of their food is insects and things like that for black bears. All right, so Jeff, we have another quiz that we're going to do for everyone. I want to know from everyone what you think the bear's strongest sense is. Do you think it's their eyesight? Do you think it's their smell? Do you think it's their hearing? Or do you think it's their touch? All right, so 90% of you said it's smell, and then a couple few. Well, guess what? You are correct. Sense of smell is their strongest and best sense that they have. So bears are considered to potentially have the best sense of smell in all terrestrial mammals. So bears have 100 times more nasal mucosa than humans do. So that means they can smell really well. Black bears can smell something from a kilometer away. There's even been stories and people say that, you know, they can smell 20 miles away, and it's very possible. So one of the pictures you'll see on the screen is the inside of a nasal cavity. And I'm going to show you this skull that I have, this replica, and I'm going to hold it right up to the screen. So hopefully everyone can see that. So if you look inside the nasal cavity and you see kind of what looks like a honeycomb structure, and basically with all that structure inside, it creates greater surface area. And this is what helps bears in order to smell, because they have all this extra surface area with receptors in order to smell. So smell is definitely really important for bears in one of their most important sense. So their hearing, they also have excellent hearing. So bears are similar to dogs in that they can hear higher pitched frequencies than actually humans can. And you know, often chances are, if say you're out in the park or you're in a forest or something and you're chatting with your friends and you're walking through and you're making noise, chances are that bear has already heard you and it's taken off. So you might not even know that there's a bear in the area, but the bear knows that you're there because it could potentially hear you. All right, eyesight. So I guess there's sort of some myths and things like that. People have said that bears have poor eyesight. So bears have good eyesight. They see in color like us. It's not their strongest sense. We already talked about how their sense of smell is really good. But one of the interesting things about bears is you see how in the picture the bear's eyes are in the front of his face, really in the front. And you see my friend back here, they're right up front. So this indicates that they are a predator. So predators will have their eyes right in the front of their face. And what this does is this creates like a binocular vision. So it gives them better depth perception so that they are able to track down prey. Whereas prey often will have their eyes more on the side of their head, which give them better peripheral vision. So that, for example, a prey could see like potentially a predator coming from the side or even sometimes from the back. So bears are not actually that much of a predator. However, they are classified as a carnivore. And probably in an evolutionary standpoint, at one point they were definitely eating meat, but meat is not a major part of their diet at this point. So bear signs. So the next thing is, you know, bears are out and about, and we might not even know they're there, but there's ways to find out or be able to tell that there's bears there, especially when you're in a regional park or something like that. So bears will leave different signs for different reasons, and they might be communicating to other bears that are in the area. So one thing bears will do is they will, obviously you'll see a scratch on trees to leave a communication or sense. They'll urinate to leave markings and things like that. They'll bite, as you see the picture of the bear biting the tree. Sometimes they will bite to leave their scent or a notification that there's other bears. Tracks, you might see their tracks in the mud and things like that. And then of course there's our favorite, bear poop, or what we call scat. So here is a replica of bear poop. So this bear poop, it tends to be more tubular, if you can kind of see. See, it's more in a tubular piece. However, this can be quite different depending on what the bear is eating. So in the picture that you see on the screen, it's quite dark and black. That's common. It's usually in a larger pile than any other animal that's probably going to make. But it's not, doesn't always have that tubular shape. It will be dependent on what the bear is eating. So if it's eating more meat or fish, it will look a certain way. If it's eating more fruit or berries, you'll see all sorts of seeds in it. That's what often people are able to identify the bear poop. They'll see seeds and berries and things like that in it. And depending on what they're eating, if it's more wet or moist things, the poop might be like that. It might be more loose. So recently I was at Derby Reach Regional Park, and I had someone come to me and say, oh, there's fresh bear poop on the trails. And I had actually seen what she was talking about. And actually what it was coyote poop. So it did look very similar to bear poop, but it was in much smaller piles. But because the coyote was eating berries and fruit and things like that, it was much looser, and it didn't have the defined shape normally you see with coyote poop, kind of twisted ends with fur and things in it. So coyotes actually can have a very similar diet to bears, and they will eat fruit and things like that. So the poop can look similar. And they're also opportunistic feeders like bears. So basically they will sort of eat whatever they can get their hands on. And another interesting thing I've always noticed about the coyotes in our parks is, for whatever reason, I think it's a territorial thing, they like to poop right in the middle of the trail. So if you see that poop right in the middle of the trail, chances are it's a coyote letting us know it's there, and other coyotes knowing it's there. So another sign that you might see is like a little tuft of fur on a tree, snag there. So bears rubbing up against it and leaving some fur behind. So this was a picture that I found that came from a wildlife cam from Minnetonka Regional Park. And this bear looks like he's just doing a good scratch at the back. But what this bear is likely doing is he's leaving his scent. And the reason why he's probably doing that is he's probably getting ready for mating season. So I happen to note on the bottom of the photo that the picture was taken in the middle of May. And that is about the time when black bears will start their mating rituals and start marking and letting females know that they're in the area. So that's potentially what this fellow is doing, is he's letting females know that he is ready to mate. All right, so next quiz. Okay, so what is the size of a cub when it is born? 1/2 pound, 2 pounds, 5 pounds, or 10 pounds? All right, so the majority of you think it's like my baby, 10 pounds. Well, 13% of you are correct. So baby black bears are only 1/2 pound when they are born. So very, very tiny. So they're born in the den with the mom. So black bears have something called delayed implantation. So when I showed you that picture of the male in May getting ready to mate, so black bears will mate in between May and late June, maybe mid-July. However, the fertilized egg doesn't actually get implanted in the female until the late winter when she goes to den. So this will happen too only if the female is big and fat and she's like really healthy and she's had a lot of food. So if she's doesn't have enough weight and to sustain herself and her baby, she might not have any cubs. So if she's really healthy and she's had a lot of food, then she will be able to have the cubs. So females have anywhere from 1 to 6 cubs. 6 would be pretty extreme. It wouldn't be very common. Probably more on average would be 1 to 3 cubs. And also females can have more than one father. So you see the picture there with the 4 cubs she has. There's a potential that there could be more than one father for those cubs. So as I said, so these little tiny half of a pound bears come out. I couldn't even find a picture of it. And so they're really small, they're blind, they just have a little fuzzy fur, and they come out and they start feeding from their mom. And the mom's milk has like 30% fat in it. So it helps for the babies to go really fast. So we're gonna try this. Oh, here we go. Hopefully, let's see if you guys can hear it.
It's very loud.
Sorry. So it's probably not that loud in real life, but that is the sound of babies nursing from their mother. So it's like a little purring kind of noise that they make when they're happy nursing with their mom inside the den. So mama bears take care of their little cubs. So they'll take care of them till they're about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, and then they send them out on their own. And then, but they're very protective of their cubs. And sometimes when the bears are in distress, this is what they will sound like. So I apologize if this one's going to be a little bit loud too, but this is a poor little bear cub that's in distress. So that's a little fellow who's potentially lost his mom and calling for her to help him. So they're very protective in the first little bit, but once they reach about 2 years old, they're off on their own, and that's sort of it. Sometimes the females will stay in the same territory as their mother, but often the bears will go out on the male bears will go out on their own. The females also have to be careful when they have cubs, because sometimes dominant males will try and kill the cubs too if they're wanting to mate with the female. So she has to be really careful about protecting her cubs for the first little bit. And unfortunately with bear cubs, there's only about a 50% survival rate for the little cubs to reach adulthood. So it's a tough life. So now let's talk about what's for dinner. So we're going to talk about what's for dinner for our wild bears and what's for dinner for our urban bears. So generally, bears would be eating things like salmon, they would eat dandelions, they eat grasses, sedges, they'll eat berries, they eat ants, things like, so everyone has a misconception that the bears are actually going for the honey. What they're actually going for is the larva of the bees, because the larva is very rich in protein. So that's actually what that's actually what the bears are going for. So even though that bears do eat meat, 80 to 95% of their diet is actually vegetation. So the majority of their diet is actually vegetarian. They will eat, as I said, salmon and sometimes small mammals and even carrion, which is like a carcass if they found that. But generally they're going to be eating berries, grasses, things like that. However, our urban bears have discovered that humans leave a lot of awesome things for them to eat, and they can get a lot of calories from them. So things like bird feeders, you can get lots of calories from bird feeders, both hummingbird feeders and other suet feeders. Sometimes people leave pet food out in their yard, and bears will eat pet food. Garbage, compost. Bears will eat all this stuff. So remember, bears, like coyotes and raccoons and all those kind of animals, are what we call opportunistic feeders. And so they will basically eat whatever they can get their hands on and whatever is easiest. So if humans have left them a buffet of what they consider something edible, they will eat it. But that's not what we want. So at the end, we'll talk a little bit about things that you can do in order to stop bears from getting into your garden or your yards and things like that, and things that you can do to prevent that. All right, so we have another quiz. So I want to know how much, like in one day, how many calories do you think a bear can eat? All right, so yeah, a lot of you got it, and it is actually 20,000 calories a day. So what happens is sort of this time of year when we're getting into fall and close to winter, black bears go into something called hyperphagia, which means extreme eating. And so that means they need to eat 20,000 calories a day. So let's think about what is 20,000 calories today if we were to think about it for us. So that would mean you would have to eat 80 McDonald's hamburgers, or you would have to eat 133 wagon wheels, or 385 apples, or 1,000 ketchup packets, or 1,250 mini Easter eggs. And remember, that's just one day, that's what they're eating. So they're eating that every single day. So obviously, if there's food sources that humans are leaving out that are really high and rich in calories, like bird feed or different types of garbage, they will definitely go for it, because they need to, at this time of year, they really need to pack on the pounds. So good job for guessing that, you guys. That was great. It's kind of hard to believe, though. So where are these guys going in a little bit? So bears, when it comes to winter time, they will den. So bears are actually not true hibernators. So they're actually go into something called torpor. And what it is they slow down their metabolism, they slow down their breathing, they slow down their heart rate. But it's different than hibernation, is that torpor is like a little bit shorter time period. So during this time, they're not peeing, they're not pooping, they're not doing any of that kind of stuff, but they can awake from it, and they may awake from it, depending on why. So our bears often will go into this state because of either cool weather or lack of food. So here on the South Coast, it's not cold enough for bears to need to den. So for a bear with this nice thick coat, it's really not that cold for them here. However, generally they're going to go and den when they don't have enough food around. However, what we're seeing more and more, and I've heard of this happening, for example, in communities like Maple Ridge, we have bears that are out all year round now, because if they're able to access foods from humans and things like that, when typically normally they wouldn't have food sources, then they can definitely stay around all year. So we really want to make sure that in the winter months, we're making sure there's no available food sources for the bears so that they stay in their den. So bears will kind of go in like rock crevices or dig under rocks. They will go under tree trunks at the base of them. They will go sometimes, like you'll see that picture of the bear like inside the tree trunk. Those are the kind of places that they'll find to den. So But bears are out and about in the spring and summer times too, and often they're not in a den, they just will sleep anywhere. So we have in one of our parks, Kanaka Creek Regional Park in Maple Ridge there's a lot of bear activity. Some of you, if you've been to that park, you probably know that. And in certain sections of the park, there's this long, really tall grass. And it's actually impossible sometimes to actually see the bears. And a lot of times they could be laying in that grass and people walk by and wouldn't even know it. So it's just another thing to keep in mind when you're in our regional parks, that one of the reasons to stay on trails and things like that is because potentially you could run into wildlife like bears and other animals that are in those areas, and that you could surprise. So we don't want that happening. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about behavior. I know that some people maybe have fear towards bears. I think the way that bears have been portrayed in movies, TV, and things like that, that they're this aggressive creature and that attacks and things like that. And that's probably the farthest from the truth. So bears are actually quite shy creatures and traditionally very solitary. They don't often hang out together, and they don't often want to be around humans necessarily. So they do have a dominance hierarchy. So you'll see the picture up top with the fellow rubbing against the post, which is kind of ironic with the caution in bear sign above him, and that's at Kanaka as well. Potentially it's in regards to mating, but it also could be letting other bears know that he's in the area. So for example, if there's a more dominant male in the area, submissive males will try to stay out of the area. Another thing that I think is misunderstood is often bears do the posturing of they'll standing up, like the one bear in the picture below. And I think sometimes people view this as a sign of aggression. And a bear standing on its hind legs is not aggressive at all. Generally what they're trying to do is they're trying to understand the situation and get a better feel for it. So bears will stand up so that they can hear better, smell better, see better, and get a better understanding of what's going on or who's around them. So it's just they're really trying to gather more information. You'll often see that bears like to go in, black bears like to go up in trees, and a mother will often tree her cubs if she fears for them. So this is a typical strategy that a female will do. If she thinks her cubs are in danger, she will send them up the tree. So I do have another clip of sound, so we'll try this one. So this is a bear communicating to her cubs. So that's sort of the way they kind of communicate in these low moans and things like that. So often in movies and stuff, the roaring that we hear of bears is like dubbed over, and sometimes it's not even a bear that they use. Sometimes I've heard they use lions and things like that, because a bear's roar actually is not as big as what people want it to be. In those circumstances, they will make some of those louder noises, potentially when they're wrestling with other bears or things like that and fighting, but generally bears are pretty quiet. So some things that a bear might do to protect itself or tell you that it's uncomfortable is they do something called a bluff charge. So it means where they kind of run a little bit towards you and then they'll stop. And basically, they're just telling you that, hey, I'm uncomfortable. This is my space. I need you to get out. The other thing that bears will do sometimes is they do like huffing, kind of like a breathing, or they will click their teeth or pop their jaws. So I'm going to try to play a sound of that. We'll see if you guys can hear the clicking of the clacking of the teeth. Oh, sorry again. So I don't know if you could kind of hear that kind of the breathing, the huffing, and then that. So that's a bear that he's kind of huffing and then clacking its teeth. And again, he's just saying, I don't want you to be here. This is my spot. You need to get away. So if you ever do encounter a bear, best thing to do is stop And then, you know, with keeping your eyes on the bear, back away from the bear and go back the same way. You don't ever want to go by the bear, okay? You always want to back out and go the way that you came. Even if it's going to take you longer to get back to where you came from, it's always best to go back out the way that you came. So before we kind of end and stuff and we answer questions, I just wanted to give everyone some tips about how we can coexist with bears both in regional parks and at home. So when you're in regional parks, it's always a good thing to think about traveling in a group, being alert of your surroundings. So in our regional parks, we often put bear signs up. And I think I'm seeing a lot more bear signs these days all over in different municipal parks or different places and things like that. And I think all of us get a little bit complacent. But you do have to remember that there's a potential for the bear in the area. In regional parks, we often put them out and take them down depending on when the bears are actually in the area. And it doesn't mean you need to be scared to go to the park, because we have parks that bears live in them all the time and they're going to be there all the time. It helps for you to know that you should adjust potentially your behavior. So other things is potentially avoiding wearing strong perfumes. Remember we talked about that good sense of smell? It could potentially be an attractant to a bear. Always keep your kids close and not running off ahead, because if they ran off ahead and there was a bear around the corner, then that could be not the greatest situation. Making noise, clapping, singing, talking. It's always good to just have conversations, because like I said again, those bears, they have that excellent hearing, right? So they might hear you and they'll be long gone before you even come around. So from my understanding, bear bells are not the best. So that noise that the bear bell makes, it sort of is not a noise that bears associate with humans. So actually the talking, the singing, making loud noises are better than using a bear bell. The other thing that's really important is to keep your dogs on leash. So there has been situations where people have had their dogs off leash, the dog runs off a little bit, encounters a bear, you know, there's a kerfuffle, the dog comes running back to the person, and guess who he brings with them? Yes, this fellow. So, you know, that's another reason why you want to keep your dogs on leash in parks and things like that, or in any, you know, outdoor backcountry space, is you just don't know. And dogs sometimes don't always have the best interactions with bears, and that is a potential for happening. If you're jogging or running, and especially in a park that you know that there's bear activity, maybe don't wear your headphones so you can be a little bit more alert and aware of what's going on around you. Especially too, I've seen joggers and they're just quietly running through, and it's a good potential to surprise a bear. You're going to watch for fresh bear signs. So I showed you a bunch of things you can look for, the scat, scratching, and things like that, so that you'll know that a bear's in an area. You're never going to approach a bear. So you always want to keep a minimum of 100 meters away in our regional parks, and then potentially you just want to leave the area. So you just want to leave the bears alone. And of course it should be common and somewhat obvious, but never feed wildlife in regional parks too, because you don't want to be attracting animals to come. So how about in our homes? So a lot of us now are having encounters with bears in our communities, in our areas, and maybe possibly you've been like me. I know that some of you have said that you've had bears in your backyard. So it's really important to manage the attractants in your yard. So things like bird feeders. So I made the choice of taking down my bird feeder because it was attracting bears, and so that was important for me to, even though I enjoyed feeding the birds, it was more important that I kept the bears safe and didn't get them into trouble. You know, not leaving pet food out, cleaning your barbecues. Remember I talked to you again, we keep talking about the smell and how good their smell is, and that they get attracted to all these smells. They get attracted to the weirdest smells, like petroleum products. Rubber tires sometimes can be attractants. So those are the kind of things that's important to clean up. Your compost, if you have like a backyard compost, you want to make sure that it's not super stinky and you don't have like meats and things in there. You want to always make sure that you secure your garbage and recycling until the morning of pickup. So when I worked for Bear Aware, and we would go out and we'd check people with their garbage and stuff like that. And sure enough, people were putting their garbage out the night before because it's convenient. I get it. But guarantee you, bears were in those garbage cans before the garbage man even got there. And there was everything all over the road and all that stuff. So it's really important to try and just put that stuff out in the morning. And if you do, because a lot of us, and I think in most communities now, have compost green waste bins. If you got like really stinky, smelly stuff like bones and meat leftovers and stuff like that, you can always throw that in a Tupperware, throw it in the freezer till the morning of pickup, and then you put it in your compost bin, and then it won't be so stinky and attracting bears. Picking fruit from your trees. So a lot of people think, oh, well, fruit's natural, bears should eat it, but it's your fruit tree. It's a human fruit tree, and we don't want bears to become food conditioned, so they think that it's okay to get food from people. So even if it's a crab apple tree, you might not want to eat the crab apples, but a bear probably wants to eat the crab apples, and if he's eating fruit from that tree, then he's going to get himself into trouble. A lot more people now are having like urban chickens or potentially beehives in their backyards. So that's another potential attractant. You might want to do like electric fencing. A lot of times actually the bears are after the feed, especially for the chickens and stuff. It's not necessarily the chicken that they're going for, but they'll eat all the grain and things like that. So if you keep that nice and clean as well too, it's less of an attractant. So those are just a few of the things you can do. So hopefully that's helpful. So before I end off, I just want to leave you with a few resources. The RAP line is a line that you could call if you had an encounter with a bear that was concerning to you. So if you felt you had an encounter with a bear that was aggressive or anything like that, you could call this line and it goes to the conservation officers. You don't need to call it just if like you saw a bear, you know, on the road or something like that, but it's more if there was, you know, a bad encounter with a bear that you thought that the conservation officers should know about. Also, you could, if you saw an injured bear or something like that, that'd be a line that you could call. Wild Safe BC is a great resource. So that is the group that used to be called Bear Aware. So now they're Wild Safe BC because they actually deal with more than just bears. They talk about cougars, coyotes, all different things. And that the Get Bear Smart Society is a great resource too. They've been doing work with bear awareness for years and years now. So I guess that's it for me now. I hope it was interesting and fun for everybody. I think we're going to do some questions and answers now. I'll try to do my best to answer your questions. And I just want to say again, thanks for everyone for joining us tonight for this topic. I'm glad that we had such a great turnout because it's a really important topic for me. So hopefully people have a better understanding of how they can appreciate bears and how they can coexist.
Okay, we do have some questions here. I'm just joining you on the screen here, so I'm just not this, you know, this headless voice. So first of all, I just want to make a comment also that someone mentioned that when you're camping, to hoist your food in toiletries, which is really important. So, or if, you know, if they have caches, to use those for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
yeah.
you have a number of questions coming in. The first one is, would a bear ever want to make contact with you and why?
Would a bear ever want to make contact with you? Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's a potential. So different bears would. So we have bears that are more wild that potentially don't want to be around humans, but probably some of you have noticed that there is more bears within our communities. And if bears have been conditioned to think that it's okay around to be humans, that it's okay to be around us, then they might be more willing in order to be closer to humans. So like all wildlife has a range when, like say if a person gets towards an animal and it has a comfort zone of where it's like, nope, I'm out of here. This is, you're too close for me. However, with bears, what's happening is because they're relating food source to people and they're getting that reward, they're definitely becoming more comfortable with being around people. And sometimes they might just be curious. I'm not sure if people saw the recent video of the woman on the Coquitlam Crunch, I think it's called, where the bear came and tapped her on the leg. So I think the bear was honestly just being curious. He wasn't being aggressive or anything. And it will also depend on the age of the bear. So for sure, those younger bears, sometimes they learn different things and they can be a little bit more bold. Like I said, they're teenagers, and sometimes they will not really think about it and definitely will approach people maybe than an older bear would know better too.
Okay, next question. You already talked about dogs interacting with bears, and someone wants to know, what if they're walking their dog on a leash and the dog starts barking at a bear who's at a distance and they can't get their dog to stop barking? Is that an issue?
Yeah, potentially it could be an issue because, of course, with bears, what they might see that as a form of aggression, right? Because that's the bear or the dog's way of expressing that he's not happy. And of course, the bear might not be happy. I mean, there's probably a couple different scenarios that could happen. It could scare the bear and the bear could be like, I'm just out of here. Or the bear could see it as like, you know, the dog trying to challenge. So again, best thing to do is like move out of the area and go back the way you came. Like another thing that I noticed with the video of the woman on the Coquitlam Crunch was that if you notice, if anyone who saw it, the bear tapped her because she was kind of standing there because she didn't know what to do, but then she chose to go past the bear. Whereas I would have recommended for her to stop and go back up and leave the way she came, not try to get past it. So just because a bear too is seeming calm, and they are, remember they still have these like really sharp claws and really sharp teeth, and whether they want to, they could harm you in a way when they're not even trying to be aggressive, just the fact that they have those. So it's always best to remove yourself from the situation and try and back out, but keep an eye on the bear so that you know you're watching where the bear's heading.
Okay, next question is about bear spray, and does bear spray help?
Yeah, for sure. So bear spray is definitely an option for people to carry bear spray. So some of the tips I would recommend is if you are going to carry bear spray is that make sure it's ready. So like having bear spray in your backpack tucked away is not ideal. So I've met some people like who walk in Kanaka and stuff, a gentleman, and he has it on his belt loop and stuff. And especially depending on it might not be as necessary in like a regional park, but if you're in a back country, that you could use bear spray. One thing you do have to be careful though is that also the other challenge with bear spray is you have to be cognizant of the wind. So if it was a windy day or something, you use bear spray and it goes back into your eyes, then now you're blind and things like that. So you just want to be really careful, but it's definitely an option. I would consider it probably more of a last resort. I would recommend just removing yourself from the area. But if the bear was still approaching and you felt, you know, for your safety, then definitely it's an option.
I'm going to add on a question to that. What about bear horns? You mentioned bear bells aren't that great, but what about a horn?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So we talked about that. I mean, one thing we call that sort of hazing too, when you make loud noises and then to scare the bear away. So a couple of things you do have to be careful depending on where you are, because you want to be careful like where you want to haze the bear too. But then apparently some of our colleagues in central area, they were trying that, but eventually the bears just got used to the noise and it didn't, you know, I mean, it'd be different if it was a bear, say you're in a back country and they'd never heard that before. But if the bears are really urban bears and they're used to some things, it might not faze them.
Next question, and just to remind people that if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. So there's some that are coming in the chat box. I'll try and get to those as well. But the next question is, this person said they've heard that there has never been a report of a bear attack on a group of 3 or more hikers. Is that true? Or is that just reassuring to those who hike in groups?
I don't know. I have actually heard that myself. I don't know that that's true. I would think, again, it is definitely better to be in groups, right? You have a better chances are you're talking and things like that anyways, because I think a lot of the interactions where bears and people have, it is potentially a person surprises a bear, because like I said, so black bears are not predatory. So black bears do not go out going, I want to get people. That's not their intent. There has been some cases of bears stalking people. That has definitely happened, but it's very, very rare, and that's not a common thing to happen. So I don't know exactly if that statistic is true or that fact, but I would say it's definitely a better way to protect yourself, because a person on their own, quieter, you could surprise a bear and something could happen.
Okay, here's an interesting question here. Do bears eat their poop and drink their pee?
I'm not aware of the bears doing that. I know that some animals do, like rabbits and things like that. Rabbits definitely eat their poop. I don't believe that bears do, no.
Okay, next question is, how long do bears live?
So bears can live, so in the wild, bears could live potentially 30, 40 years. Probably chances are it's more like 20. And the highest cause of bear deaths generally is human related. So if humans were not around, bears would probably live a lot longer. So that's either or hunting or things like that. You know, bears in our urban areas, that say, for example, that conservation officers have to come and trap and things like that. I know we would all like to think that those bears get transported to some other location far away, but chances are a lot of those bears actually have to be euthanized. And there's other things like road collisions, you know, cars and things like that. So potentially bears could live to 40 years, probably 20 to 30 would be more realistic.
I just want to say thank you to people for joining us, but we'll stick around for a few more minutes and answer more questions because there are more coming in. And just keep an eye out on the Pacific Parklands Foundation Facebook page for future webinars. So, okay, I'm going to continue on here. So one person wants to know, when a bear is approaching you, besides backing away, should you yell and make noise or quietly back away, especially if it is coming towards you? That's a good question.
Yeah, so typically in the past and stuff like that, it's like, you know, make yourself big and like make a lot of noise. I mean, there is a potential for when you're doing that for a bear to see that as a sign of aggression. So I would keep the noise and things like that more to before you even see a bear. So making all that kind of noise and things like that. Of course, if you had a bear coming after you and was coming after you and you couldn't and get away, and then yeah, you'd fight back and you do what you have to do, pick up a stick or anything like that. But generally, chances are bears are just they're gonna go the other way. But you don't want to kind of stop and like stare at them, make eye contact, because they could see it as like you potentially trying to challenge them. And it is potential. So recent, or not recently, but at one point, one of our patrollers, she did have black bear in one of our parks bluff charge her, and so it was fine. The bear just ran up and stopped and told her like, hey, you're in my space, you need to get out, and that was fine, and that was all that happened. The bear didn't go after her or anything, and she just left the area and it was totally fine.
One question is, how many cubs can a bear have in their lifetime, and do they have many multiples? You talked about
so bears, black bears are not super efficient at having babies. So it takes them a while to, so females are about 3 or 4 years old, or potentially even 5, when they're ready to reproduce. And then, so I can't remember exactly, I read, potentially only like 10 or 15 cubs, which is not a lot compared to other species and things like that. When you think about it, they can have, you know, thousands. So they're not super efficient at reproduction, and the survival rate, like I mentioned, is not that high.
Yeah, so someone's making comment to here. Another option is to scare a bear away. Mike McIntosh video uses a garbage bag to scare away bears. You take a garbage bag, open it up, and shake it to get a noise in it, and they don't like the noise and take off. This is not well known. If you want to touch on it for the next one. Oh, anyway, so I guess they're commenting that this is a strategy. Do you have any comment about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely. And there's different scenarios too when you're in a park and stuff like that, or in your home. So when I had bears come into my backyard, I definitely made it known to them that I didn't want them there. I mean, I thought it was really cool because I'm an animal lover and it was cool to see bears in my backyard. But I definitely made a lot of noise and tried to shoo them out of the way because I didn't want them comfortable for them to think it was okay to be in my backyard hanging about. So definitely if there's options, especially when you're in the safety of your own home and ways to make noise and things like that, to scare them away, that's definitely possible. But again, it just depends on the bears because the time that I yelled and screamed at the bears, they just kind of laid there and rolled around and didn't really seem to be bothered by me.
So someone's commenting here, worst case scenario, if there's no way to run and it's a close encounter to aggressive bear, what do you do? This person's heard that playing dead can be a last resort.
Yeah, that's like one of those old myths about playing dead. So it depends, and I'm certainly not an expert, so I would just do your research online and things like that. I've heard like if you are being attacked by a bear and stuff like that, you definitely want to make sure you're covering your head, your neck area and stuff like that. But that tends to be talking more about like grizzly bears and stuff like that in those kind of scenarios. So that's not typically anything that you would have to worry about with black bears.
We have one more question here, and that is when and how should you use bear bangers? Do they work? I know that's quite contentious.
Right, yeah, so bear bangers. So I used to do field work, and so we were provided with bear bangers because I'd be up on like Forest Service roads and things like that way off in the back country. So I definitely think in those scenarios, potentially bear bangers could work, but I would be really like, if you're in a regional park, for sure you cannot use bear bangers or anything like that. I don't know how effective they are. A lot of people struggle to actually get them to shoot in the right place. There's also the potential if you shoot the bear banger and you shoot it behind the bear and it scares the bear towards you. So yeah, it's not something I would think typically like in the Lower Mainland in your yard or in parks or anything you would carry. I think it's more, like I said, when I was doing field work out, like we're back in the bush where nobody else is around, you potentially could use the bear banger. So when I did field work, we always carried bear bangers and bear spray, of course.
Well, thank you so much, Zoe. That was awesome. And we're getting lots of comments just in the chat box, how people thought that was a fantastic presentation. Janet, I'm going to get you to put up that last slide. So thanks again, Zoe, for that. I mean, I've heard this many times and every time I learn something new. So thanks so much. I just want to put up a slide with the websites for Pacific Parklands Foundation and Metro Vancouver Regional Parks. There we go. So those are, if you want to contact Pacific Parklands Foundation, that's their website. Metro Vancouver Regional Parks, go to our website. And again, I want to thank Pacific Parklands Foundation for hosting this webinar, tonight's webinar, and the whole webinar series. And it sounds like everybody enjoyed tonight's webinar. I hope you learned something and it helped you. And enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone, and stay safe during these challenging times. And yeah, thank you very much and take care. Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.